right, welcome all, and thank you for joining us. I'm Emily Burns, an associate professor of art history and the director of the Charles M. Russell Center for the Study of Art of the American West in the School of Visual Arts at the University of Oklahoma. Long before the university was established, the land on which the university now resides was the traditional home of the Haznai Caddo Nation and Kirkiris, Wichita, and affiliated tribes. We acknowledge this territory once also served as a hunting ground, trade exchange point, and migration route for the Apache, Comanche, Kiowa, and Osage nations. Today, 39 tribal nations dwell in the state of Oklahoma as a result of settler and colonial policies that were designed to assimilate Native people. The University of Oklahoma recognizes the historical connection our university has with its indigenous community. We acknowledge, honor, and respect the diverse indigenous peoples connected to this land. We fully recognize, support, and advocate for the sovereign rights of all of Oklahoma's 39 tribal nations. This acknowledgement is aligned with our university's core value of creating a diverse and inclusive community. It is an institutional responsibility to recognize and acknowledge the people, culture, and history that make up our entire OU community. Tonight, we have the second lecture of this year's series, Monuments and Memory in the American West, which is sponsored by the Merkel Family Foundation. This series probing questions like, whose memory is designed through art? What are the spaces to resist or to build counter-memories? Will be taken up by today's distinguished artist, whose practice has long addressed these questions through multiple media and contexts. These questions, long central to the Russell Center's focus on art as it relates to the Western United States, are especially appropriate as we remember our own founding 25 years ago this year. We look forward to continued involvement in key conversations involving the arts of all makers in the American West in the coming years. And I'll quickly note that there is a talk in the Lightwell Gallery just after this event by visiting artists Alana Clark and Corrine Spencer, and also writer and producer of Reservation Dogs, Sterling Harjo, will be speaking after a screening in the auditorium in Gaylord Hall at 6:30. So busy day of events. And while you're here, please do sign our guest book. And if you're in Dr. Chavez's class, please do sign the list that you'll find on the table just by this door. Lastly, I'd like to thank the Russell Center support team, especially Sharon Burchett for managing logistics, and graduate student Morgan Ross, who will be watching the live stream to capture any comments or questions that come through and translate them into the room. Thank you all for joining us, and we look forward to extended discussion after the talk. To introduce our speaker, I invite to the podium my colleague, Dr. Alicia Harris, Assistant Professor of Native American Art History. Thanks.
Ambadaya, Chaje Mitawa Alicia Harris, Je Macha Hude Shana Nakoda, Pinami Ingche Wichashta Makoche Ne, Nina Pinamia, Dr. Burns, Hinkna, Sharon, Hinkna, the Russell Center. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Alicia Harris. I am a member of the Red Bottom Band of the Assiniboines from Fort Peck, Montana, and I'm assistant professor, as Dr. Burns mentioned, of Native American art history here in the School of Visual Arts. It's my pleasure to introduce our distinguished artist lecturer, Chris Pappan. Chris is an artist of Osage, Kaw, and Cheyenne River Sioux and mixed European heritage. In the 1990s, he studied painting at the Institute of American Indian Arts, one of our friend universities, and has been making art on historical ledger paper since 2008. More recently, he's begun working on installation, billboard, and sculpture. His website describes his art's role to, quote, reflect the dominant culture's distorted perceptions of Native peoples while proclaiming that we are still here. My students will recognize this as a response to the salvage paradigm. We talk about it a lot. Enmeshing historical and contemporary visual practices, Pappan draws attention to erasure and dispossession, especially in urban environments and museum spaces. In an essay on Pappan's practice in the recent volume, co-edited by my colleague Dr. Eve Chavez with Dr. Nancy Mythlow, Visualizing Genocide, Indigenous Interventions in Art, Archives, and Museums, Iris Colburn summarizes, quote, Pappan maintains a material and conceptual strategy based in ledger art to grapple with the United States' ongoing genocidal project to erase Native peoples through multiple shifting tactics or what scholar Patrick Wolf terms, quote, the settler colonial logic of elimination, end quote, end quote. His work taps into ledger drawing as a medium of resistance, refusal, and ingenuity. He also uses ledger forms to unsettle practices, especially in a project that included annotated decals that were added to exhibition cases in Chicago's Field Museum. Those took place between 2016 and 2019, about which he described his desire to, quote, bring Native people to culture and cultures out from behind the glass. Chris's intervention at the Field Museum prompted further renovation of the gallery in the 2022 Native Truths, Our Voices, Our Stories. His work has been shown in solo exhibitions at St. Mary's College in Notre Dame, in the Missoula Art Museum, and Northern Michigan University in Marquette. His work is included in many group exhibitions, including the inaugural Native Futures exhibition at the new Center for Native Futures Gallery, of which Chris is a co-founder. Other group exhibition spaces include the Hyde Park Art Center, the Rainmaker Gallery in Bristol, England, and he has art currently on view at the National Gallery of Art in their ongoing exhibition, The Land Carries Our Ancestors. His work is widely collected, including by the National Museum of the American Indian, the Museum of Contemporary Native Art in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and the North American Native Museum in Zurich, Switzerland, the Idle Jorg Museum in Indianapolis, and, of course, the Fred Jones Jr. Museum here on the University of Oklahoma campus. Chris currently lives in Chicago, and he is represented by the Blue Rain Gallery in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Chris's lecture today is entitled The Art of Chris Pappan and Acts of Visual Resistance. Please join me in welcoming my friend, Chris Pappan. Pinamia.
Do you want me to move this out of the way? Okay. I also do roadie work, so if you guys have a band or anything and need me to move amps, I can do that too. So thank you, Alicia, for that wonderful introduction. I had no idea I did so much. You just make me sound so good. I'm just, oh, thank you. Thank you, Emily, for inviting me, and you and Sharon and everyone here has been so warm and welcoming. It's been an honor to be here. So thank you, everyone, for coming. I know there's a lot going on tonight, and got some stiff competition, but Sterling's a great guy, too, so go and see him. Yeah, so thank you all again for coming. I didn't grow up here in Oklahoma on the Kaw Reservation. I didn't grow up in Kansas, the state that is named after our people, Kanza. I actually grew up in Flagstaff, Arizona. This map kind of is probably familiar to a lot of folks here. The dark green areas show traditional homelands of some of the mid-southern plains peoples, and orange shows current reservations. And the Kaw Reservation, just a little speck of that orange right there. So when I was here a couple weeks ago for the ATOM conference, I actually was able to make a trek back up to the Kaw Reservation for a nice little visit. So it's good to be back in the homelands once again. Can everyone hear me okay? Am I speaking loud enough? Okay, thank you. So like I said, I grew up in Flagstaff, Arizona. People always think of Arizona as being very desert-like, but Flagstaff is actually high in the mountains. It snows every winter. It gets cold, so we have seasons. It's not just hot or not hot. And then I went to the Institute of American Indian Arts in Santa Fe straight out of high school. And that was in Santa Fe, so it was pretty much like straight across from Flagstaff to Santa Fe. Still kind of high desert. But it was there I met my wife, Deborah, who grew up in Chicago, but her family's from Jemez Pueblo, which is right by Santa Fe. So that's how she ended up there. I ended up there. I went back to Chicago with her after we graduated, and that's where we've been raising our daughter, who's in college now, and a performing artist. So that's a little bit about my quick little bio. When I was at the Institute of American Indian Arts, when I first went there, I was very conscious to try to stay away from creating quote-unquote native art. Growing up around Flagstaff, there was a lot of curio shops, art done for tourist industry, and being young, I assumed at that time to be a native artist, you had to do that kind of work, and I didn't realize until later that I can express myself any way I want to. So, but while I was at school, I was just trying to stay away and just trying to work on developing as an artist and learning different methods and materials. After I graduated and moved to Chicago, I took some classes at the School of the Art Institute. And that was very, very different than a small Indian arts college in Santa Fe. And so I think I kind of got turned off by art school at that point and from that experience. So I went out on my own. And it was around that time too when quote unquote lowbrow art was becoming more accepted into the quote unquote highbrow institutions. Like graffiti was becoming more acceptable to be shown in art galleries kind of thing. So there's a magazine called Juxtapose Magazine that was coming out at that time too, showing these lowbrow artists. And one of them on the very right, who did that Neil Young poster, I saw that and I was like, oh, these non-native artists are appropriating native imagery. That's what if there was a native artist who was doing rock posters? That would be so cool. And then this guy, he's just a great draftsman who really influenced me. But then I came across the work of Douglas Miles and his work with developing his own company and called Apache Skateboards. And I thought, this is where it's at. This guy is doing this. It's so awesome. I can really relate to that. And then he saw what I was doing too. We've been in contact ever since. And this was back in the MySpace days. I don't know if any of you remember MySpace, but I'm dating myself. So, but Douglas Miles too. He hasn't been an influential artist, not just an influential artist, but also an influential community organizer as well. Because through this skateboard company, he's done work for his family, and they travel around and they bring people to the community and they bring people out of the community, and it's been a wonderful and inspiring thing to watch him grow over the years as well. Kind of backtracking, I'll kind of go back and forth in a linear sense of my art history, but when I started doing the ledger art, I was doing it on contemporary paper, and that's what sparked my interest. Having learned about ledger art at the school in Santa Fe, when I came across this paper, that was when I realized that I can make Native American art the way I want to, and then I can learn more about my heritage the way I want to on my own terms. But then I realized that this is a big responsibility as an artist, and representing my people, my nation out in the world is a big responsibility. So I took it upon myself to do more research on ledger arts and where it comes from and the hows and the whys. And living in Chicago, there are a couple of institutions that have very large collections of work by Silverhorn. Silverhorn is a very well-known Kiowa artist. I was just looking at a book about him earlier today, Candace Green's book. Having done some research on historic ledgers, you realize, that there's certain themes that are very prevalent in the earlier works with battle scenes and hunting scenes and that sort of thing. But with Silverhorn, I think because of the time period of when he worked, he saw a lot of transition, so his artwork was also very transitional and transcendental as well. So, he went beyond just everyday life scenes. He was illustrating creation stories, like in a flip book, telling these stories. And at first, I didn't realize what was going on, because the one in the upper right, I came across that image, and I was like, wow, what's going on here? I didn't know the Kiowa creation story. And so I posted it on Facebook. I was like, does anybody know what this is? And like right away, it's like, oh, that's a Kiowa creation story. And I went back to the Field Museum and looked through this book after I learned the story, and I was like, oh my God, this is like it's totally laid out here in visual form, and that was just amazing to me. So there was that aspect, and then also in his work, he was very active in the Native American church, and he would draw visions that he would have in these church sessions. And then he was also influenced by the Euro-American artists who he was working with, because obviously they were coming down and painting portraits of him, and so then he in turn did his own self-portrait, which you see on the lower right. And so it's just a great thread to see, like, from doing artwork on hides and then doing it on ledger paper, and then how that transformed through Silverhorn into self-portraiture and storytelling, and then this place here at OU, the Jacobson House, showing the Kiowa 5 artists who are directly related to him, and just it's wonderful art history here. So again, it's an honor to be talking with you all about my work here. So having kind of, I guess, established myself as a ledger artist, which I didn't really set out to do, but again, it's like these things kind of happen for a reason, I guess. And this was a very interesting thing that happened. Anthropologists in Germany who I know contacted me and said that they were gonna, they wanted to talk about this book, this book in a book that they were publishing in German for German anthropology students. And to me, this is a supreme act of visual resistance. So taking the object that was used to subjugate or to convert Native folks from their religion to Christianity by translating the Bible into Lakota language. And the fact that this person then just took that book and said, I'm drawing my life in this book, and just use the paper out of the book for his substrate. To me, that was amazing to me. Allegedly the book came from Cheyenne River Sioux Reservation area. I don't know exactly where, but yeah, so it wasn't acquired by ethical means. So I felt that is one way that I could help maybe bring it home. When the anthropologist asked me to talk about this piece, I said, well, it comes from Cheyenne River Sioux. You need to talk to those people, talk to somebody from there. He's like, yeah, I know some folks there, but you're doing ledger art, and I want you to talk about it. So I was like, okay. So yeah, hopefully it comes home one day. So I talked about when I started doing ledger art, these are some of the first drawings that I did on the paper that I had found. And that's what sparked my idea. So I wanted to draw things the way that I like to draw, surreal imagery, repeated imagery, and playing around with different things. And then, like I said, I wanted to take it more seriously, so then I started acquiring historical ledgers, and then I thought it would be a great juxtaposition to have this realistic, modern way of drawing on these historic ledgers. And some of the first ledgers I was getting were from eBay, and they were very arbitrary, but they're old and they're kind of interesting and they have history to them. So nowadays, though, I'm a lot more particular about the ledgers that I purchase and try to find. So ledger art historically being a narrative art form, so I want to be more conscious about telling not like straight out stories, but kind of providing more inspiration through storytelling, I guess. And so I've developed a number of themes in my work. And so one of them is fire, the burning of old ideas to create something new. For me, the trailer represents poverty and acceptance of lower standards, because that was my experience growing up. And so I'm burning that for myself and hopefully inspiring other folks to say that, we don't have to accept these lower standards anymore. We can accept better for ourselves. And that's what our ancestors want for us too. They want us to better ourselves, to better the world. And then started incorporating pop cultural icons such as UFOs and putting them into weird situations. But the UFO I like because it's the idea of the invading force, right? Of the U.S., the white man coming and taking land and taking things from us, and which still happens today, and with pretendianism or people appropriating imagery or mascots, what have you. And then another theme that I've developed in my work is the idea of multiplicity. So, looking at old ledgers and, seeing all these figures doing lots of things. And, of course, that's all part of the narrative, but just looking at it visually, I thought it was really interesting. So thinking about it in pop art terms, like, what would Andy Warhol do with this kind of idea? And so, just taking that one image and repeating it. So with that piece, I tried to make it more like a three-dimensional circle. So you're kind of like you're on the outside of a circle. And then also within that idea of multiplicity, kind of a multiplicity of self. At first, it kind of started out as maybe an individual pulling themselves apart, but I like to see it more as two ideas coming together to create something new. So when I take an image and then mirror it and bring it together, there's a new idea, a new thing that happens in that intersection of the figures. And to me, that's the most important part of those drawings. And I feel that's just very representative of who I am, because two different worlds coming together. That's who my wife is, literally two sides of the world coming together. And so, again, playing around with multiplicity and different ways of distortion and distorting the figure. As was mentioned in the introduction about how America has a distorted view of us, and we are also culpable in that distortion as well. So. But I really like how these are developing, like the grid distortion, and it's like a fracturing of our people, but we're also coming back together and piecing ourselves back together so that there is a semblance there of a whole, but it's not quite whole. And then this is recent work I did for a show in Chicago. And again, it's that idea of ourselves being broken up, but kind of coming back together. And then the blue represents the Chicago River. So it's very personal. And so the Chicago River is represented throughout the city as a Y shape because it has three branches. And that's because they had to reverse the flow of the river in the mid-1800s, because Chicago was using it as a sewer, which then flowed out into Lake Michigan, which was their drinking water also. So, so to rectify that, they reversed the flow of the river to go to St. Louis. So St. Louis got all of Chicago sewage instead. So. And then these are just some ideas of different ways of distorting the figure, some older works. and some historical examples of not necessarily intentionally distorted figures, but the fact that the proportions weren't as important as the action is. And then there's another group of figures that are coming out in my work now too that I call the transformational figures. And so these are figures that reach back further in time, that reference creation stories, reference deep histories that indigenous peoples understood before quote unquote Western science. Western science is just now catching up to indigenous knowledge, basically. The fact that, that we come from stars, or that we're star people, is one of those ideas. And just because we said it in a different way and they didn't understand that, it doesn't mean, it's not, it's the same idea. But, so anyways, yeah, these transformation figures represent that, represent a time when people and animals communed together, when people communed with non-human beings as well. And so this series was done as a response to a book that I found that was titled, Your New Hobby is Indian Dancing and Costumes. And so it was published for the Boy Scouts of America, for young boys and girls to learn how to dance like an Indian. And you're supposed to learn that through these awkward, static, black and white photographs of these high school students in their gym uniforms. So, my daughter dances in ceremonies in Jemez Pueblo, and understanding the sacrifice that she makes for humanity to pray in that way, seeing this book is just, it was so enraging to me, and I wanted to find a way to bring these figures out to show people, what's, the things that we have to deal with as Native people. So eventually I ended up incorporating these transformational figures with those awkward black and white photographs from that book, entitled the series of White Bread and Miracles, kind of playing on white bread and Miracle Whip. And then these are some other transformational figures. So the buffalo woman is in direct reference to buffalo calf woman from Lakota stories, and deer woman, and also the deer priest now represents the Southern Plains cautionary tale figure of deer woman. And then these pieces also represent kind of that bringing all of these elements together, the fire and the distortion and the transformation figures. And when I set out to do this ledger art in the way that I wanted to do it, I also was consciously thinking about how do I break these boundaries but still keep it within the realm of ledger art. And one of those ways is through scale. A lot of ledger artists tend to limit themselves to one single page. But again, in the center, here's a historical example of the artist using the full page in the book, using both sides of the paper to tell the larger story. So then I wanted to create large-scale works, so then I started tiling paper together. And then, so these drawings on the left and right are basically life-size. That one's 72 inches high by 36, and that one's like 50-something inches high. So, and I was lucky I found ledger paper that size. I didn't realize how rare that was, because I've used it, almost all of it up now. And now I'm like frantically looking for more that's that size, and I can't find it anywhere. And And so this is another recent series that I did. This is kind of based off of the White Bread and Miracles series, and thinking about how, thinking about the book and why it angered me, and then thinking about, not just my daughter, but how our ancestors were killed for, they're practicing their ceremonies, for dancing, for the ghost dance, basically. And so this series was done for a Veterans Art Triennial in Chicago. I myself am not a veteran, and when they asked me to be a part of it, I'm just like, I'm not a vet. Are you sure? I don't want to step on any toes. And they're like, no, we know what you do. We're asking other Native artists to be a part of this. And the theme of the triennial was America's long wars. So the war against terrorism and the war against the indigenous peoples of this country. So I was like, okay, I can do that. So then I created this series, and the idea is that they're in a circle dancing around the central figure, and the imagery behind them are like shields, but some are based on ghost dance regalia, and some are based on military insignia as well, U.S. military insignia, and then that also speaks to the number of Native Americans who serve in the U.S. military, and that sort of thing. So, and using those multiple pieces is also another way to expand the scale of the work. This was an installation that I had the opportunity to do in Indiana. Just trying to think about stepping off of the page and how can I express the idea of ledger art without drawing on ledger paper? So taking some of the elements that I have in my drawings and just taking them off the page and putting them on the wall, and then the ledger pages just on their own as well, acting as its own element within the work. And then another art installation. I think of this as an art installation / intervention / retrospective, kind of. So the Field Museum approached me to create an exhibition, first to go to the collections and look at the work and create works based on my reactions to some of those things. But for those of you that don't know, the Field Museum is very notorious in terms of their old collection practices. You had mentioned the salvage salvage anthropological methods, and yeah, the Field Museum is like one of the major perpetrators of that. So, I really grappled with, do I really want to do this here? And then I thought, well, it would be a way to, if I could at least plant one seed and with somebody that this isn't us now, this was our past, but this is not us now, then I will have been successful. So one of the ways to intervene in that exhibition hall was to create the decals that went directly on the glass. So that's some of my drawings reproduced in these large decals that had transparency, so you could kind of see through them as well. So you could get a hint of the history behind it, but you're confronted with the present. Also, I use my work to bring life to the taxidermied buffalo there. That apparently that buffalo has its own story about how it got to the museum. Somebody had started to do research and write a story about it, but I don't know if she ever finished it or not. But apparently there's like some crazy story of how it got there. But yeah, so I wanted to bring life to it, incorporating old photography by Edward Muybridge, who was very instrumental in the development of motion pictures. So he did a series of running buffalo, and you'll see that a lot in my work as well. So it was really interesting when people would be confronted with my work and then kind of not make the connection that this was done by a living person. And they came to the Field Museum to see bows and arrows. So then they would go around and look at the diorama instead of looking at my paintings or drawings. But I did create a video installation for that as well. So it was really cool because you could see it from both sides. The hall was like, it's like this tall in this room, and goes like way out into the parking lot. But so the screen is up high, and you could see it from both sides. So I really like that, and it felt like it was mirroring the imagery like I do in my drawings. But this video had a soundtrack as well, which had contemporary music mixed with traditional music that was taken from wax cylinders from another museum collection. So when folks were trying to reconnect with something familiar that they knew, like the diorama or the bow and arrow instead of my work, they were then constantly reminded of contemporary Native people through that soundtrack that you could hear throughout the whole hall. And so here is a little snippet of that video. So in the background, you'll see one of the first motion pictures ever created, Buffalo Bill's Wild West Dancers. It's only 14 seconds long, but you can find it on the National Archives website. And that's our daughter. And then I was also thinking about the film as historic substrate as well. So working with distortions to distort the figures, different ways to do that, including the ledger paper in the background as well. The soundtrack was done by Santiago X, who's Kushada and Chamorro. Deborah. I think the video is like just over 4 minutes, so I'm just showing you a little bit of it. But so eventually, my exhibition led to donors donating enough money to deinstall everything that had been on display since 1950 in that hall, and to work with an all-Native American advisory board to develop this new exhibition called Native Truths. So yeah, if you're ever in Chicago, let me know, and maybe we'll take you to the Field Museum, but we have other things to show you in Chicago that are better than the Field Museum, I think, which I'll talk about in a second. Some public art projects I've been a part of. This one was done in multiple cities. Chicago, being my city, my piece was created for Chicago, but it was displayed also in Toronto and in New York City, Austin, and Houston. And the idea behind the whole project was, dismantling monuments and what would you put in its place. So you as an artist come up with a two-dimensional idea of a monument. So I thought of like historical marker signs and just different ways of creating a historical marker sign. So this one represents Native people of the Great Lakes area. So. This is a WPA mural that's in Chicago. Again, thinking about monuments and how to reinterpret them or how to interact with them. This one probably isn't as shocking as some others. This is supposedly an actual event that happened to Pierre Marquette, who was one of the first Europeans in the Great Lakes area. And he kept journals, so this is from one of his journals. But what really struck me was, this act of giving a deer. And so I created 2 life-size deer priest images that now live directly across from that mural. And I got to keep going. Sorry, it's getting late. I got to keep some time for questions. This was a electronic billboard project that's done in conjunction with Art Expo. That was amazing. Oh, there's a little thing that pops up here too. I think it takes a while. I'll just skip it. And then my most recent public art project was, I was one of about 12 or 13 other artists that got a vitrine to do an installation in. And so this is in the international terminal of O'Hare Airport. And so what I wanted the visitor or new person coming to this country to see that Chicago is a native place. That, this is what you should expect to see, not an Indian in a big headdress on a horse with a bow and arrow. That's not the Great Lakes history. That's the Plains history. That's Buffalo Bill's Wild West history. And then the purple kind of funky splotches are actually a color distorted map, old map of Chicago that was showing the city growing, but it also showed locations of traditional village sites, mounds, and some burial sites as well. That's called the Scharf map. But the cooler thing than the Field Museum is the Center for Native Futures. So this was a dream that we've had for so long, having to go outside of Chicago to find a market, to find a career for my work was kind of frustrating. I still kind of like it because I can dip in and out of Santa Fe and still keep my own voice and not be influenced too much by that scene, but Chicago still needed contemporary Native American representation. And so we established a nonprofit during the pandemic, and through consultations with the MacArthur Foundation, we were able to secure this space in the building that they own, which is also problematic. I talked about that earlier in class. So we're the only contemporary Native American art gallery in Chicago right now. And these are some images from our opening. Those are all of the artists. And yeah.
Oh, it's so cool.
And that's all I have. Questions, comments?
Graphite's wonderfully archival, but do you worry, or is there any way you can extend the archival life of the historic paper?
There probably is. I try not to do anything to the paper, really. I mean, it does end up fading quite a bit sometimes. But a lot of times that's the museum's problem now. So the drawing's still there, so hopefully you like the drawing on it. No, but there are ways that I could. So I fix the drawing. I spray fixative on the graphite so that it doesn't smudge afterwards. So I kind of hope that helps a little bit, but it doesn't really hold up as much as if I sprayed the paper with like an acrylic coating or something. Which, I mean, I could do that, but then you get like this shiny sheen to it, and it kind of almost turns it into plastic, so. But, yeah, graphite's wonderful. I love it. Yes?
With your archival paper, do you only use it from certain areas, or do you get it from wherever sources you can get your hands on?
Yeah, that was at first, but now I try to be a lot more careful about what kind of paper I'm using, because like what you're saying, there's archival issues with it. It ends up fading, but some paper's better made than others. And then I just as a personal preference, I really started liking the ledger paper that have a masthead printed on the top. For whatever company it was used for, or because then that adds another layer of an artistic process to it as well. So, and then just that history of what the book was used for, and so yeah, it's not necessarily an area, but it's more about a time period of when the paper was made. Because there's like the older the paper is actually more archival than newer paper. Because then the processes changed and a lot more chemicals were involved, so it wasn't as archival. And then people started going back to more archival ways later on. So, yes.
I've been familiar with your work for quite a while, and it just occurred to me that I've never heard anybody talk about or heard you talk about the role of photography in your work, like the influence of photography. I just noticed that the drawing looked like the horse well photographed, and I hadn't really connected the dots before. Can you speak to that?
Yeah. So when I started doing these ledger drawings, there were a lot of artists that I was seeing that were doing paintings of Geronimo or Sitting Bull, and selling them in Santa Fe art galleries. And I was like, that's kind of crazy. So I started looking at through old photographs and trying to find images of folks that weren't so plain-centric, with big headdresses or whatever. So, and then looking at Ka people, Kanza people, with Chief Washunga, very charismatic-looking figure. So the historical photographs to me are very interesting because those people were living at the same time that those ledgers were being used as well. So then it's like time kind of folding back on itself, and then thus erasing that linear idea of time, and then and then it all becomes cyclical and holistic, and hopefully lasting into the future, but we'll see. Yes.
I have a related question about the gaze. When I think about the Silverhorn and Kova ledger drawings, they seem sort of hermetic, and I think it's rare for the figures to look out from the ledger drawing, but so often your figures are kind of hyper-naturalistic, and they're also kind of meeting the eye of the viewer.
Yeah, I mean, that's basically, it comes straight from the portraiture of the, you know, the photographic portraiture, and that you have to sit there and look at the camera kind of thing. But also, you know, there are some where you can find that, you know, they're not looking at the camera, and those are definitely a lot more interesting and feel more candid and more real, I think. But then, you know, with those, you know, those figures that are just, you know, straight on and looking at you, or with a big headdress, then I want to alter that in some way, you know, because to change it up to defy people's expectations of us, basically.
So has your work changed from the drawing to almost a collage or digital layering? Or is it all pieces you're still hand drawing, it just looks digital?
So like with these, I draw the figure. The figure is drawn, the trailer is drawn or painted, and then the maps are collaged. And then sometimes, not in those, but sometimes I'll print inkjet prints on the map, because I can cut it down to size and put it in my printer, and then cut that up and then collage it on there as well. So. And then, yeah, like, so these are a bit older, and then like these I did this year, so like this is all new work. Mm-hmm.
Could you talk a little bit more about your plans for the Center of Native Futures now that it's open? How do you find artists, and what kind of programming do you envisage?
So, like I said, you know, we had to go outside of Chicago to develop my art career. And during that time, we've met so many amazing artists throughout the country. And, you know, part of that dream was to bring these artists to Chicago to share them with our community. So for us, finding artists is not a hard thing to do. And and now we have people coming to us as well. So, yeah, you know, this, it's all a learning experience for sure. One of our co-founders, she actually had to take classes on how to run a nonprofit business, because she was just like, what do we do? I don't know, but it was cool because her tribe paid for her classes. So she really stepped up to the plate and got the wheels running. And so now her and my wife Deborah are the two staff employees there. As far as programming goes, like we're doing all kinds of stuff. Tomorrow we're hosting a talk with Chinupa Hanska Luger. I think he was there today as well. You know, we've had other artist talks, we've had performances, we had poetry readings, and we opened in September of this year. So, so we've been busy. And for the future of futures, I think just more of the same. And the space, we have a 3-year lease. And hopefully our landlords will see the benefit of us being there and will extend that lease. But we'll see. The ultimate dream will be to have our own building where we can have more studio space, more maker space. We have one studio in there now with an artist in residence right now. So, yeah, it's been really cool to, you know, help develop our little artist community there in Chicago. So. All right.
You're gonna do the miniature fair, the miniature art fair in Chicago?
Miniature art fair.
There's a miniature art fair in Chicago.
Oh.
$500 to $1,500 a booth. And
Oh.
like heavy duty artists will have itty bitty little galleries.
Oh, how funny.
You have to be part of it.
I just did miniature work for a show at Blue Rain, so maybe they were kind of copying that, like, oh, that's a good idea, we should do that. Chris, send us some miniatures, okay. But, yeah.
Please join me in thanking Chris Pappan.
Thank you all. Everyone enjoy Sterling Harjo.